Yeah, I'm Shamira Graham. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer, but crucially, I'm here today because I wear two hats. I'm also a practicing clinician. So I have the privilege of designing pathways and working with our referral partners, but also working on our pathways clinically. And I've got the privilege actually of being able to oversee the safe service of 60,000 patients that we're able to see at Onebright every year. So they come through a combination of referral partners. So we work with all the major large private medical insurers. We do lots of work direct to corporate. And we also have worked for the last 14 years looking after GPs and hospital doctors on behalf of NHS England. So all of this gives us a real rich data set, some of which we're going to go through today. So I think we're going to start with a poll. So the question that the poll should be asking is, I just wanted to get a feel for the room to say what percentage of your workforce do you think had a diagnosable mental health condition in the last 12 months? Some options there for you to start. Oh. Okay. Any late entries? Interesting. Okay, so I was about to say we've got 35%. Joe, keeping me on my toes. Okay, so we've got an equal distribution between 15 and 20%. 22% of you thinking 30 and 11% thinking 7. Okay, so based on the data, based on the literature and the evidence base, we know people will have heard this 1 in 4, so obviously that will be 25. But when we're thinking about working populations, the data tells us it's more about so it's about 20%. So well done to everybody the 36% of the room that got that correct. However, do all those people seek help? Do all those people seek treatment for their common mental health disorder? They don't. So as employers, when we're thinking about our workforce, it creates an opportunity. Because if you think these are individuals that are suffering, so their function is impacted, their relationships are impacted, and obviously in terms of their performance and work is also impacted. So we know depending in which sectors we're looking at, really it's around sort of 4 to 6% of those individuals will actually take active steps to seek treatment in terms of psychological therapy and clinical support. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're thinking about your well-being and your mental health strategies. There is an opportunity, there's an unmet need in organisations. Okay, so we've done that. I'm going to flick through that. So this actually would be one thing that I would love you to take home and think about today. One of the most fundamental pillars when we're thinking about workplace mental health is the fact that it is dynamic and it is contextual. So what does that mean for you as designers or purchasers of mental health provision? It means that at different points in different lives, people's needs are going to be different. So sometimes people are going to be performing, they're going to be thriving, they're down the left-hand side of the continuum that we're looking at here. Their functioning is going to be high, they're going to be motivated, and they're going to be absolutely productive. They're going to be flying high at work. And then because it's dynamic and contextual, something may happen. It may be that actually there are multiple transactions at work. It may be that they're under-resourced at work. It's maybe that they've had a promotion and actually they're lacking in a little bit of confidence because of it. It may be outside of work, they've got additional caring responsibilities. So at those points, just like our physical health, potentially they're going to move down the continuum into compromised health and unsettled health. So as responsible employees, and when we're thinking about workplace health, we're always thinking, where are our people on this continuum? Does my provision that I've got in the organisation, is it appropriate at each level? And actually, am I signposting people to the right support at the right time for them? So we can translate that continuum of mental health and well-being into performance. So our role is to keep our people in our beautiful green zone here. So their health is optimised, their performance is optimised, they're under just the right amount of stress to be able to perform at the highest level. If that were true, then actually my company, we wouldn't be having 60,000 patients through our door. So we do know that people tip into the red zone here. So we know their mental health becomes compromised and their performance accordingly dips down. So hold all this in mind when we're thinking about workplace strategies. And some organisations potentially have got provision that is really just about well-being, so it may be some apps, it may be psychoeducation, and so they're focusing on provision at one end of the continuum. Others may have something here, but it's really important that we've got balanced provision. Okay, so thinking about our ill health passage here, I just want to think about anxiety. So we see, in terms of our data, so back to our 60,000 data set that we see every year, we know that the most common presenting problem that people come into for clinical psychological therapy is what? Has anybody got an idea what the most common presenting problem would be in terms of mental health diagnoses? Yes?
Lack of sleep.
Sorry? Lack of sleep features, but there's something that's part of the presentation, but there's some other associated. Yes? Anxiety. Anxiety across private medical insurers, hospital doctors, police is the most common presenting problem. So what is happening in organisations and sectors and actually in society that is making people anxious? Okay. Back to the data. There's a theme here. You will see that I absolutely love data. So what we've noticed, we've got a data set probably that's over 15 years now. And these are the most common presenting problems. So when people talk about common mental health disorders, they're talking about anxiety disorders and they're talking about depressive conditions here. So of these, when people come into Onebright, they come in, they will be assessed. And actually there's 33 diagnostic categories that those individuals could fall into. Over the last year, 34% of those patients have met the diagnostic criteria for generalised anxiety disorder, also known as high functioning anxiety. So what is happening to make this increase year on year? Okay. So when we think about workplace mental health, there are two components. There are us as individuals and people on the right-hand side, and there's also workplace conditions. There's also the jobs that we do, the level of autonomy we've got, the responsibility we've got. So when we're thinking about our people, what do we want those people? What do we want those people to be? We want them to be organised, driven, effective, productive. That's what we want our people to do. So we tend to recruit people that have got those traits and have got that background. They've normally been successful, they've got a really high degree of responsibility, they've got a high degree of ownership. Okay, so these potentially could be the perfect employee, and it's really what people are looking for. So as we know, there's an issue with talent at the moment in the UK, and actually these people are highly sought after. So we want them, and actually I want my doctor to be this, I want my lawyer to be this, I want my HR director to be effective and productive of work. But then something happens at work, and we talk about workplace factors. So we might have a hierarchy, they might work in a regulated environment, there might be peer competition. So two factors combine, an individual with all their traits and their background and their preferences, combined with what is happening in the workplace. And we've coined this phrase that actually it's the perfect storm. So these people over here tend to have very high standards, and actually throughout all their life, they've been able to execute at quite a high level. And if they continue to work in that way and at that level, then actually they feel good, anxiety is low, no depressive episodes, and actually performing well. Over time, bearing in mind that mental health is contextual, sometimes it's unable Two, we're unable to work in such high levels that we've enjoyed before. So therefore we feel that we're compromising our standards, we feel that we're falling short, we feel that other people are judging me. So this is what we observe time and time again in workplace mental health when we're thinking about why is our number gone up to 34% who are meeting this diagnostic criteria. So one way to think of it is that they're highly worked in the workplace, but actually they bring a lot of themselves in terms of they're actually quite highly wired. So when we think about generalised anxiety disorder, what is it? It's about worry. So it's really characterised by uncontrollable and excessive worry. And we think that we are trying to solve our problems, but actually we're making ourselves anxious, and it tends to be catastrophic. So this is what people are doing in the workplace, but actually you will observe those people as they will be highly functioning, completely under control, really prepared. And this is why it's a difficult thing for workplaces to consider when they're thinking about their strategies. So what we're looking at here is some of the beliefs. So these are from our clinical records. What if I make a mistake? So these are all worries that we're looking at here. What if I make a mistake? What if they think I'm not smart? What if my peers are viewed more favourably? I must be in control and prepared. These are things which have actually served these people well to a certain point in their life. So what they will do, and these will be the behaviours you will see at work, they will be punctual, they will be organised, they will draft, they will read around the subject, they will make sure they're more prepared than anybody because they've got these cognitive worries running in their minds. Over time, what do you think would happen if you were performing at this level and you've got other demands placed on you? So caring responsibilities, relationship breakdown, you might be too down in your department at work. If you're functioning at this level, what do you think would happen over time? If we think back to that curve, where are you going to potentially end up? Burnout. Yeah, and this is exactly what we see. So it might not be your typical idea of what anxiety in the workplace looks like, but actually this is what we see. People that don't say no to anything. Yeah, I can do that. Give me that work. Social event, yeah, I'll be there. Of course I'll be there. And actually we end up with these behaviours which start as helpful but tip into unhelpful. And this is really the distribution. So based on the data that we've got, when you're thinking about your teams, your people, your divisions, your departments, you're probably going to be something like this. So when we think back to that 20% that we spoke about at the beginning, this is really your distribution of your people. And actually you're probably, in terms of people that are accessing help, are right on the edge. They're this sort of 4%. So it's thinking about what can we do? How can we reach people earlier? Because that, as a clinician, that is my primary concern. How can we get help? How can we build preventative strategies so that people, if possible, can maintain in the green zone here? And this is absolutely true. High functioning anxiety works brilliantly well until the moment that it doesn't, until that person says, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to potentially, this is, people hear this term of burnout, and this tends to be burnout would precede high functioning anxiety. So it works brilliantly well until it doesn't. So what does all this tell us? Thinking about all of that and putting it into your wellbeing strategy, I've put this up, as an example of what most organisations do, but actually really what you shouldn't do. So imagine that I'm highly anxious, imagine that I'm irritated, I'm restless, my sleep is compromised, I'm barely getting through it, I'm looking after the kids, I'm getting them to school, rushing to work, getting into work, and I know that I need some support, and I'm trying to navigate provision, maybe I'm going to websites, maybe I'm going to intranets, because this is what organisations do. They come to something like this and they think, oh, that sounds good. I'm going to see if I can add that into the provision in an organisation. So you end up with a really complicated arrangement of benefits. And as an employee, it is so difficult to try and navigate. Do I need my EAP? Do I need my private medical insurer? Should I download that app? Is that app evidence-based? And we end up in quite a difficult situation. So I popped that up as really so to prompt you to think, please don't do that, and think about what services have I got and how do they just go back to that continuum which I popped up at the beginning. So when we're thinking about best in class wellbeing strategies, we've developed a product, and actually it came from treatment and clinical services. So we are a treatment provider, and actually we were noticing that all the patients we were coming through, there were just some common themes. So for example, when we're thinking about professional services, high functioning anxiety was there. The components of high functioning anxiety: worry, rumination, and perfectionistic traits, as an example. So what I did is spoke to the organisation and said, rather than we know your 34% is here accessing our services, how about we take that information and build out some early prevention, detection and awareness. So we do skills classes and master classes. So think about your people, think about the generational element, and think, what is it that they need? How can I move them? How can we as an organisation move them further down the ladder? So this is an example of where we're taking people's clinical records, obviously all anonymised, and we're looking for trends. So this is a big data set. This is probably 10,000 people in the data set, and you can see some common themes there. So as an organisation, we are putting on, that organisation knows these are my common themes that my people are telling me. How can I build programmes out to support anxiety, worry, perfectionism? So it's about upskilling your workforce to think about the traits that take them into. This is another example you will see there, generalised anxiety disorders. So in terms of my workplace strategy, if I tackle those 3 common presenting problems, but just 3, I'm going to get 90% of my workforce. So it's using our data and thinking about what is it telling us and what can I do earlier. If you can measure your people, just like you go for your MOT and your GPs, try and measure your people. There's a multiple of ways to do that. But what that allows you to do is to think about your 20%, think about your 4% that we're accessing, and thinking about your 16%. That's what you need to be targeting and thinking about those people. And there's multiple ways to do that. Again, more data, generational data. I am sure you've heard lots about that today. So we know that typically 18 to 25-year-olds, females in the workplace, have got the poorest mental health of all individuals based on our data set. Now, because we know that, we can do some targeted interventions, we can do scaffolding. We know that that is the predictive profile of people in our organisations that actually we need to work really hard for. Debt, this is interesting again. So we measure everything over time. So if I just draw your attention to the debt slide here. So this is quarterly data, again, 30,000 people in this data set. Debt is becoming an increasing problem. If you know that, you can think about your financial well-being, because these are people that have come from mental health. And the question was, are there any other factors which are influencing your mental health? Debt. And we know that because of obviously the cost of living crisis. This would be the utopia. This is what we do for many organisations, but the principle is you take what we're learning here and you apply it. You're getting your data and you're applying it here. So we know that younger individuals need additional scaffolding. We build scaffolding programmes here when they come in. So what can you do? Your quick take home. Maybe take a picture of this, because we've got to gamble to the end. There's huge amounts that workplaces can do. Of course, if you can offer amazing provision, fantastic. But remembering there's 2 parts to wellbeing. There's the individual, so there's individual interventions, but there's also the culture, which we know makes a huge impact. When we think back to those people blocks and that workforce block, there is a lot that we can do. Modelling, getting your senior stakeholders to tell their stories about mental health, to create the wallpaper, if you like, the landscape in the organisation where mental health is accepted. Make sure you're thinking about stratifying your people. How old are your people? What potentially could be the generational challenges that they're finding? Get your data. I'm sure you've all got providers and they might say, oh, we're not able to give you that data. We can only give you utilisation data. Get your data. Be insistent and ask your providers to give you the data, because once you've got your data, you can build preventative and proactive strategies. So take homes are, do 3 things. Think about your provision. Think about the continuum. Hopefully you took a picture of it. What am I offering, to whom and where, and how do they access it? So we work with many, many global organisations. They've got everything, and their people just don't know. They don't know what it is, when they need it, or how to get it. So that's the second point there. Please make sure you do that, and know your people, ask your people. There's huge amounts of generational data now out there. So if you've got a younger workforce, then actually you need to be working harder to support them. And I am up for time. We're at stand 34, so I'd love to talk to people more, and feel free to ask any questions.
Fantastic. We do have a couple for you. Shamira, thank you for your talk, first of all. The first one is the very immediacy. So there's a lot in there in practical takeouts and tips, which is great. But what would be the one take-home that I could implement next week for my organisation?
I would find out what is offered. I would take a picture of that slide, and I would think about, is it the EAP? If it's an EAP, that goes sort of in the green and amber. Have they got private medical? Then that is, that's towards the amber and the red. Have I got a network? Have I got wellbeing ambassadors? And I would create a one page, and I would put it on the intranet. I would email it around to people with the contact numbers for how they can access each of those. Because when we need support, we're not going to be mining through information to try and find that. So I'm sure that all of you will have provision. So it's making sure it's accessible to the people that need it when they need it.
Thank you. And another question, we're hearing a lot about increasing prevalence of mental health conditions in children and young people. And whilst not all of those are employees in the workforce, clearly they will be families of people who are in the workforce. What's contributing to this?
It's a big question. So it's multi-factor. So I know there's been lots in the media about social media. So social media is a factor, but it's not the only factor. There's an impact. There's lots of evidence now about, because of the cost of living, more both parents having to work, so that's creating impacts at home. COVID has obviously had a huge impact. So we know, particularly on teenage girls, the data's just coming out. So the CAMS, so people accessing CAM services in the statutory sector, we know that the data is fourfold from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, young girls meeting diagnostic criteria. So it's about COVID, social media, parental impacts as well. So yeah, there's about sort of 8 to 10 factors which we know are contributing.
And I think that does feed into the second question we've got up on Slido here about, we've been doing these things for a long time. It's getting worse. What's new? I think you've highlighted some of those things. Is there anything that you would add to that?
There is a school of thought, and actually some generational data just came out of this from King's College just yesterday, and if you ask younger people, they will say, actually it was always like this, there's just a language for it. There's a language, there's an acceptability, there's a destigmatisation of it. So actually, have prevalence rates got worse? Query, are they more reported, and are people more likely to seek help? I think that is also part of the answer as well. Okay,
and just to squeeze in very, very briefly before we change to our next speaker, do you think flexible working supports those with high functioning anxiety?
It's a good question. The data is mixed, I would say. So if there's, particularly if people are neurodiverse and they're anxious, they may benefit from home working as an example. So reasonable adjustment should always be considered in those instances. If you're engaging in rumination, then actually we know that breaking rumination, i.e. occupation, when you're in an office and somebody comes to talk to you, will break the rumination cycle. So arguably, in that case, you could argue that it's helpful. I think like anything, I would say hybrid, ideally, obviously with reasonable adjustments considered. And we've looked at the data, and actually certainly in COVID, if we think about COVID, depressive episodes went up because people felt isolated. So we do know that people's social context does drive potentially loneliness, driving more depressive episodes. So I think if it was me, we try and ask people to be in 2 days a week. That's our model, obviously with reasonable adjustments as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shamira, for your talk. Please show our appreciation.
Thank you.